Hello, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. We have a great panel for you. Final Boss, why Web2 gamers are wary of crypto. Before we get to that topic, of course, I want to introduce or have my esteemed panelists here introduce themselves. So Travis and Katrina, if you could please give a little background on yourselves professionally.
Sure. I'll go first. So I'm Katrina Wolfe. I am product director at Laguna Games. We make a game called Crypto Unicorns, kind of a pet collectible with jousting and battling and lots of things. We've been out for just about a year. So that's where I'm at currently. And before that, I was at Congregate, working also on blockchain gaming, and then a lot of traditional mobile free-to-play games before that.
That's amazing. So I'm Travis Boatman, longtime video game practitioner, kind of started in the late 80s. Did a bunch of mobile stuff, was at EA Mobile and Zynga, driving kind of mobile development and strategy kind of across the board. And a bunch of years ago, decided that I love mobile games, wanted to keep doing it, and built a small studio called Carbonated. We're not that big, we're about 20 folks, and we're building a game that you can probably sniff around and find. It's called Mad World. It's not formally announced yet, but we'll probably be announcing it in the next kind of couple of months. It's traditional on the top of the game, but has a kind of deep Web3 component in the Elder game. And I'm relatively new at the Web3 world, and excited to be here and talk to everybody, and learn from you all on the Web3 side, and hopefully share some stuff on the traditional game side.
So let's talk about origin stories before we get into the meat of it. Staying with you, Travis, you just said you're new to the Web3 world. I would love to know your origin story, whether it's blockchain, crypto primitives, whether it was investing in crypto, or whether it was gaming. What was your origin story to get into Web3 gaming and blockchain?
Yeah, so ours is sort of interesting. When we founded Carbonated, the venture market was pretty terrible at the time to raise capital for gaming, and so we knew a lot of people through the industry, and we were building this live ops platform, which is part of our company, which enables us to do lots of really cool long-term support for games, which is important in mobile free-to-play. And as part of founding the company, we wanted to start building that live ops platform first, and we knew the folks over at Glue Mobile, and they knew who we were, and they knew we were building this live ops platform, and they said, hey, would you be willing to take over this game that they had that was in trouble at the time, this game called Racing Rivals. And the game had a bunch of problems, they were going to shut it down, and they said, but if you guys can keep it going for a while, we'd love to work with you. You can battle test your live ops platform on our game, and so on and so forth. So we said, let's do it. So we attached our live ops platform, we took over the game, tried to sustain it for as long as we could. And what was interesting about that game was deep inside of it essentially was a kind of a broken economy, but it was essentially a play-to-earn game. And it was a traditional game, but it had this ability to trade currency and items between players. There was a huge group of people in Indonesia and the Philippines who were driving the entire economy. And so it looked a lot like what Axie Infinity looked like more recently, but back then. And so our job was to try to figure out how to stop this kind of play-to-earn component, as we were paid to do. And the first thing we realized is this would be a great use of blockchain and kind of Web3 technology at that time. So we looked deeply into that space and sort of said, can we make this work? And this is sort of 2017, 2018, and gas fees were too high, it was too slow, not performant enough. Given this was a mobile game, the SDKs around onboarding were just not mature enough yet. So we couldn't make it work. But that was when we sort of got the bug for the first time and started to continue to watch and follow along with the Web3 space. But seeing it in a live mobile title and seeing the audience engage in it was a proof point for us that there is demand here, there is a need for this, and there is a way that it impacts mobile games primarily in the mid-elder part of the game, kind of retention, monetization, less top of the funnel. And so for us, we said, well, if we're building the game that we're building, this might be a really powerful component for our mid-elder game, based on what we had learned from our time watching Racing Rivals. So that's sort of how we got into the space and how we link what we learned in the past to this particular title that we're building now.
Yeah, and Katrina, same question to you. What was your origin story into blockchain and or Web3 gaming? Yeah,
so for me at Congregate, they had been involved in kind of blockchain, exploring blockchain technology pretty early on. I don't remember how early, but probably 2017, similar timing. And it was on a different team than I was. It was a platform team, and they were kind of, had stickers on our website, and we made them NFTs, and there was cryptocurrency. And so I kind of saw it all from the edge and didn't dive in at that point, but I kind of kept it in the back of my mind and paid attention to what was going on. And then later, kind of when everything got a lot more exciting and there was a lot of hype and whatnot, we decided to kind of put a lot more people on on blockchain gaming in general, figured out how does it fit in our company, what makes sense, and I basically volunteered. I was director of operations at that time, and I was like, this, I want to do it. It seems cool. And I kind of just dove in there, and sort of the optimism of the community and all of the kind of new ideas around ownership really spoke to me. And so from there, I just kind of jumped in, and then later I got connected to Laguna Games through a colleague, and really was like, I'm excited to kind of dive in and work on a game and be product again and get really into the meat of actually creating. Whereas at Congregate, I was a little bit more strategy and kind of helping teams think about how to build games. So that was sort of my progress into the Web3 space.
It sounds like both of you had fairly optimistic views on Web3 gaming from the start. Were there ever situations where you were wary of Web3 gaming and blockchain-based gaming before we get into what Web2 gamers may think of Web3 gaming?
I kind of had some skepticism of like, how is this really going to work? Does this make sense? It just took a while to understand sort of what the offerings were of like, what does ownership mean of digital assets? That was something that, we have a concept of to some degree, but it didn't really evolve for me until I spent a lot more time paying attention and listening to people and being a part of communities and that kind of stuff. And so I definitely think there was skepticism. I don't think I had the same, strong negative feeling that I know many do, but I kind of just dove in and just tried to figure out, okay, what is happening here? Obviously there's something exciting because there's so many people so excited, there's so much optimism. I'm like, there has to be truth to that. So I just dove in and then kind of bought into the whole ecosystem.
Travis, were you just down the rabbit hole once you found out, or did you test your resolve at times? Tested my resolve at times. I think, our team is very sort of pragmatic, very thoughtful. I think the things that we identified from our experience on Racing Rivals and just watching the industry, and we're fortunate that we being in the games industry as long as we have, we know lots of folks. In fact, we were just talking about the fact that Aaron, who's the CEO of Laguna, has actually met with our team a number of times, and sort of we've talked to each other, and sort of behind the scenes, he's given us some advice, and we've shared what we're working on. So in talking to a lot of the folks, I think the thing that our team came away with was a fair amount of caution around how tokenomics and play-to-earn economies can kind of poison the incentives of traditional games. Meaning, a lot of traditional games, you're essentially, going to your consumer and you're saying, hey, I'll exchange money for entertainment. You give me money, I'm going to give you some fun back. And I think when there's the play-to-earn component, that gets really complicated because people are there for different reasons. And I think that's absolutely possible to do, but as more of a traditional game maker in my history, that's very alien to me and hard for me to figure out. So I think our team and myself personally are a little cautious there because some of the experience we've had in the past of watching how financial incentives can kind of pervert the fun of a game or the incentives of a game. But it's also powerful and important. So I think we're very careful when it comes to the play-to-earn sort of incentives around I'm doing this as a job rather than I'm doing this in exchange for fun. That said, blockchain brings a lot of ownership and exchange of fun in a really new and interesting way, both on the value of these items that you can own and sell in the secondary market, as well as the positive financial incentives for the studios that can make more money and then fold that money back into the development of a higher quality game. There's a benefit for players and there's a benefit for the studio. When you have both of those benefits, you can fold that back into that sort of virtuous cycle of more money flows in the studio makes a better game, and you get that wheel spinning. But ultimately, to get that wheel spinning, you need a hit game, and that's all top of the funnel, and that's all, from my perspective, much more traditional than Web3. Web3 sort of supercharges a successful game. It's challenging to use Web3 as the reason to drive users in. And so we're trying to understand the push and pull between these two sort of,
you still need a fun game.
Yeah, you definitely. Yeah, the F word, right?
Yeah.
Like, these games need to be fun. And maybe we could use that as a jumping off point to the title of this session, why are Web2 gamers? I don't like the term Web2 gamers. I prefer you said legacy gamers. It automatically feels like they're other. Like there's Web3 gamers and there's they're dead and gone. Right, we've moved on. But so maybe test the theory, like one, do you think Web2 gamers or traditional gamers are actually wary of Web3 games? And if you do believe that, why?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are many that are wary for sort of the things that Travis touched on, right? Where the incentive, we kind of got off the wrong foot of it's only here to make money, which traditional gamers, that sort of is not what they're here for, right? They're here for, I'm used to paying money for fun. And so that all being turned upside down doesn't really kind of click with them. And I think many of my friends are still very wary of it, and so talking to them, it's sort of, that's the problem, is there's not a lot of fun, there's not a lot of education either of why you might want to play a Web3 game. The traditional concepts of ownership, just, they don't really care as much, but I think that there's a lot there that we can provide, and that's sort of the really cool thing to me, is sort of this deeper ownership, the strong communities, and just how that can elevate a game. But I think it's just many people don't even see it. There's sort of a lot of high-profile incidents that don't help, people wanting to spend the effort to learn, because that's, I think part of the big reason is that there's just a really high activation effort at the moment. It's a lot to even get involved, to get past the first layers of, okay, what is a wallet? What is an NFT? Okay, there's all these new words, there's all this new stuff, and then if you have this idea of like, this sounds like not my time, I'm just gonna turn away and wait until it gets better. So I think there's a bunch of things, but all of it comes to me, it's like we need to be better at educating the traditional gamer of why it is actually worth coming over, combined with making actually fun games for them to play.
Travis, same question to you.
Yeah. Oh man. So I think there's sort of two frames in my head at the moment. So one of the frames in my head is that games is a very, I don't want to say proven business. It's not new. It's very well understood. And there's this sort of model of front to back, that when players see a game, they start with the appeal of the game. Is this something I want to play? Does it look beautiful? Then you get into the game. Is that game fun to play? Then you get deeper into the game, particularly if it's a free-to-play game. Do I come back to the game? Do I retain? And then lastly, at the very, very end, do I monetize? Do I ultimately spend? So there's sort of this front to back that's traditional in games, particularly free-to-play games, where it's sort of appeal, do I want to play it? Mechanic, is it fun? Retention, do I come back? And lastly, monetization. And so the games industry is sort of going front to back all the time, and the customers, the players, are used to this front to back, right? They see, a beautiful game up front, and then that draws them in down sort of through that funnel. I think Web3 kind of started the inverse. They started with monetization and worked backwards. So they started with, hey, here's how you're going to monetize, which makes sense with Bitcoin and the history of Web3. Sort of started with monetization, then went to things you own, which is the retention component. I want to play for something of value. And then they started to move then from monetization to retention to fun, and then lastly to appeal, to like high quality. And what I mean by appeal and high quality are things like brands or really deep budgets for really, really high fidelity games. And so I think games tends to come front to back, sort of appeal, mechanic, retention, monetization, and Web3 tends to go the other direction, monetization, retention, fun, appeal. And both will work, but gamers tend to reject aggressively if the first part of the funnel isn't there, right? So if they see a game that maybe has really good ownership and really good monetization, but it doesn't look beautiful and it's not fun yet, gamers are used to coming front to back, so they compare that with other games, and they go, why would I play this game? Because I have a million of tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of other games which are fun at the top of the funnel. And so from a customer perspective, they go, well, unless this looks as good as Fortnite or as good as PUBG, they won't even give it a try. And so I think the trick is to do all of that at the same time. And I think there's a lot of really great teams out there that are doing that kind of effort. We're obviously hoping to be one of those, was it Shrapnel, the guys right at the front of the convention, I think that's a great example of a team that's going for that high quality. The other thing that I'll just sort of mention on this topic is I do think it depends on which platform you're in. Traditionally, PC console people tend to resist that even more because they're so used to a high quality top of the funnel. Whereas mobile game players are a little more familiar with free-to-play mechanics. They have a lower expectation of quality because phones are smaller and a smaller screen. And so I think your on-ramp into Web3 will be, from a customer standpoint, from that appeal standpoint, easier on mobile than on console and PC. And one example of that is if you think about like Diablo Immortal, the console PC players were like, no, Diablo Immortal on mobile, it's the death of the world, and they all freaked out. And yet when Diablo Immortal came out on phones, players were like, it's great, it's fine. The mobile players were like, whatever, and they played it, and it's a pretty successful product. And I think there's the people that screamed, no, please no Diablo Immortal, are the same kind of people who go, please no, kind of Web3. But if the game's good, they'll play it, they'll monetize, they'll retain, and then the power of Web3, which gives you the ownership and gives you the ongoing revenue streams for the development teams, and all those benefits are massive, but you just got to do the first part well, or nobody will play your game.
It sounds like a large part of this is education, is educating the consumer, educating the gamer that NFTs, Web3 gaming, blockchain primitives, that it's not meant to replace their experience, it's meant to enhance in some sort of way. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of repeating what we've just said, right? You know, it's what is the, how do we teach player that ownership is really valuable, and what can you get out of that? And there's sort of, we spend so much money and time and energy in these games, and then when you're done, you just walk away. And there's plenty of people who get, I played WoW for quite a while, and then at some point I just was like, whatever, sunk cost, it is what it is. Whereas now I feel like there's kind of an interesting, simple understanding of, oh, well, I could say now that I'm done with this, I can trade it. Like GameStop was extremely successful for all of this, and the very, very basic concept of I finished this game and now I'm going to pass it on. So I think that's like one of the kind of easy transitions that I think people can latch onto and understand as a point of value. And then, I think there's just, to me, the exciting side is actually in the UGC world. And this is sort of when I think blockchain and Web3 gaming sort of clicked in my brain is, oh, there are so many amazing creators in the world that don't necessarily work for game companies. And if we have an ability to enable those people to make content, create cool things for us to enjoy, write stories or make new games, and I think that's sort of where, to me, the success is really going to be. Like, there's the sort of educating on like, okay, here's the basics of understanding, here's why it's valuable, and then unlock the actual potential of creating a lot more developers and a lot more gamers who can participate in the ecosystem. And that's, I think that's what's really cool and really exciting about being in the, on a project like ours where we have a DAO that's quite active and a lot of players who are really vocal and want to make cool content. And we're trying to figure out other ways, how do we enable players to take our assets and do other things and make that kind of idea of interoperability actually possible. It's not quite there yet, it's complicated, but I think that to me is where there's going to be the magic of people clicking and be like, oh, instead of, making this little character for this game and then getting nothing for it, I can make this character for a game. If people love it, I get a portion of the revenue. I can now actually have a gig even from this lifestyle. So I think that's where there's going to be, people will get onboarded in that way in a lot more meaningful.
I love that you bring up the UGC point because I wanted to talk about that. And one of the big battle cries in Web3 is empowering creators, this idea of turbocharging the 1,000 true fans theory and these sorts of ideas. So Travis, I would love to get your take on this, what you guys are doing at Carbonated that addresses UGC, or if you want to zoom out a little bit and talk philosophically about UGC, how you feel that could be a tool to onboard the next billion people into Web3 gaming.
Oh, wow, okay, mapping UGC to a billion people. Let's see, so first I'll answer the first question, which is, are we doing something with UGC in our game? The short answer is yes. Our game, Mad World, has a global territory control component to it, where players join clans and battle for control over territory. Given the game is global in nature, that the mobile players are everywhere on Earth, so the game is global in nature, and people can battle for territory in their home countries. So imagine you're a player in Brazil, and you install the game, you would probably put you in a local Brazilian clan, and you'd be speaking Portuguese with other folks there, and you'd battle for territory. Maybe you take on Argentina, or you take on another local country. And to fuel player engagement and content globally like that, you basically have to ask the players for what do you think is the right kind of events and content to drive from a global nature, and empowering players, because I don't know what's cool both in Portuguese or in Brazil these days, right? So harnessing your players to build content for them. I also, again, being a little traditional, I don't typically think about UGC in the way that you would maybe think about it in something like a Roblox or a Minecraft, because there are these platforms of UGC, but there's also games that are much more vertical. And I think you have to kind of, if you're going to go into the world of UGC, you have to sort of decide, are you sort of talking about the platform side of thing, or you're talking about a specific game that's going after a specific genre, with a specific audience, with a specific play pattern, and being very kind of focused. And then how do you engage UGC in that narrow vertical, versus this kind of like metaverse-y, Roblox-y, these huge platforms, which are also great and powerful, but boy, are those things really different from each other. And when people conflate the two, it can get really dangerous for the success of that studio, and also just communicating the value proposition to players. Like, what do you mean by UGC, and how am I getting involved in this game? And so I think a lot of these terms you want to sort of get precise on, like, well, what exactly are you doing? How are you using it in this particular case? So that's kind of how we're using it in a very vertical way for our game. I guess the other question was how we get 1 billion people into
the big one, yeah.
I mean, for that one, I think that's kind of proven. I mean, you can look at Okay, here's a good example of how I think about this. Niantic Pokemon Go is a great example. So location-based games was around for a long time in mobile. And everyone talked about, oh, we're going to make the next great location-based game from like 2006 and on. And everyone tried, everyone failed, nothing worked. There was no location-based games that were successful in mobile for a long time. And everyone said, well, that's not a thing, it doesn't work, which maybe you hear sometimes about certain components of Web3 as well. And then Niantic comes along with their kind of vision for it, come out with Ingress, reasonably successful, not super big, but proved out some of the mechanics and the retention and how that works. And then they ultimately married that with Pokemon, right? And what's amazing about that example is Pokemon has a massive appeal. Top of the funnel is one of the biggest IPs in the world, but it married with a mechanic that's location-based mechanic that worked beautifully together, and then that became a genre and a technology-defining vertical hit, right? Not just that it's a Pokemon game, but that it's a mobile location-based game. But it was successful because of the marriage of the top of the appeal, the Pokemon brand or theme, and the mechanic that was fun to play. Those two things then drove the location-based part of the game up and out. And I think that's I think that's the path for Web3. It's finding some very large appeal, some huge audience, like Pokemon, something like that, huge audience, that wants to have a fun experience in a game that is linked to the Web3 technology, like the location-based stuff was linked to Pokemon. And if you can get this, hundreds of millions of players to play a fun game, and that pulls with it whatever Web3 technology you're going to get, you'll define that genre and pull with it all the benefits of whatever that Web3 thing is, whether it's tokens or monetization or ownership or whatever. And so I think that's obviously what we're endeavoring to try to do, come out with a really big theme that draws in hundreds of millions of players, connect them to a highly retaining game with a Web3 component that then has all the benefits for players and for us. But I like looking at the Niantic one as an example of sort of a technology linked to a high appealing game. And it was, of course, in mobile where the big audiences are. But I think that's the way it'll be defined by a hit. I don't think it'll be some tens of thousands of game all sort of incrementally adding up to it. It's going to be some vertical game that hits a genre and blows that genre out and then defines for billions of people what this looks like. And I think to make that work, it's got to be a game that doesn't instruct players. It has to be elegant. It has to have, like when you play Pokemon Go, they're not explaining to you, like, here's how location-based works. It's like, it just works. You play, you say, oh, I'm going to go over here and collect something. It's awesome. And that sort of very fluid ease of onboarding. Accessible, thank you guys. Thank you for that. Accessible onboarding that pulls those people into that world I think is the way to do it.
Assuming for the sake of this conversation that Web3 tools will be integrated by games of all kinds across all platforms, consoles, mobile, et cetera, by some date, right? So all studios are using some sort of Web3 hook at some point. What will be the relationship in your minds, so I'm asking you to predict, between traditional game studios that are using Web3 tools as a hook to do XYZ thing, a traditional walled garden doing a Web3 thing, what will be the relationship between those environments and then environments that are completely open sourced, completely composable, lots of UGC, fans building upon the IP within these games? Do you see a world where this crosses over, where there are bridges and everything's working together, or do you see these as two separate worlds?
I don't know if I totally agree that it's going to take the one hit. I actually do think there's going to be sort of the gentle wave of everything shifting over. I think a big hit always makes it easier and paves the way, but just having the one game doesn't necessarily get everyone in it. It does define a lot of things, and I think that's very valuable. But I do think in this case, we're just so new in this industry, and there's so much new lingo and language and things, and so I think we're going to have a softer evolution of getting traditional gamers and traditional game studios into the Web3 world. So I think that probably the traditional studios using Web3 gamings are going to figure out how to communicate this technology to their audiences in a way that is more accessible, more appealing, easier to understand. And I think brands are also doing this, like Starbucks and Pepsi and all of these are figuring out, okay, how do we actually talk to all of the people who don't know the lingo, who don't know the space, but will want the benefits of it. They don't necessarily care behind the scenes or anything. This is sort of, I think, in a lot of the games, people don't really care that it's blockchain. They just want something fun, right? So I think that's going to be the bridge, is those traditional game studios figuring out, okay, well, we have an audience, we know who they are, but we don't want to use all of these words, and we don't need to like confuse them with the technology behind the scenes. Like most people don't really care about Unity, right? Like, you know, when you're just playing a game, what it's made on is sort of irrelevant unless you actually are in the industry. And I think that the Web3 native games are going to be sort of like, I see where a lot of the indie kind of experiences are being created. A lot of innovation, smaller games that do stuff that's totally different and just change our ideas of what is a game. And I think there's just going to always be the walled garden people who kind of have their own ideas. But really, in the long term, I think it won't even be a distinction. It'll just sort of evolve and sort of become a standard in which games are all made with some set of tools using Web3 technology.
Travis, you got about 15 seconds. Can you do it?
Go fast. I just think I've been doing games for so long. It's such a Darwinistic competitive environment that game teams will do absolutely anything they can to win, and they'll find, this was the reason why they all talk to each other, they all look at what works in the market. Everyone's trying everything to win, and so they'll use walled gardens, non-walled gardens, good tools, old tools, bad tools. They'll do anything they can to win. And there's so many different companies at different sizes. Some have money, some don't. Some have international teams, some don't. It's like this big soup of all these teams out there trying to figure out how to win. And when something works, everybody kind of looks at it and goes, aha, that works. And then you see this kind of chase effect that happens. And so I think that's probably how it'll play, because that's pretty much how it's played out for the whole games industry so far. So I think that'll be, you know, along with this, until something like, you mentioned engines, you know, everyone kind of had their own engines, everyone was sort of Darwinistically building their own engines, and then when a couple kind of really good, capable engines like Unity and Unreal started to work, the whole industry started to fold in against those things that worked.
The standardization really helped.
And I think that's going to happen here too, but it hasn't happened yet, so we're still in the Darwinistic soup place where everyone's trying to figure it out. And once those things start to work, I think you'll see it consolidate around the successes, and the successes are always driven by the hits. So I think that's how it all plays out, but we'll see.
Fantastic. Thank you guys. Katrina, thank you. Travis, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful show.
Cool.
Thank you.